In this video we're going to show you how to use the built-in OnStart and OnClose batch files in PlexEditor for Windows. We're also going to discuss some of the changes that Plex Media Server version 0.9.8 and higher has affected. If we go look in the Plex database where Plex is storing our database files, metadata files for our movies and stuff, it's in this file here in the user directory. It also has two other files. It used to use a journal for a cache file. Now it has these two files here with the extension db-wal, which stands for write ahead logging, and then this shm file, which is the index to the write ahead logging cache file. Normally, when a database connection is closed in SQLite file with a WAL logging turned on, it flushes the cache, commits all the changes to the database, and then deletes these two files. However, best way I can figure out is Plex has set an option to not commit this to memory when the Plex Media Server is closed. For instance, if we close it now manually, these two files stay here, which means that any changes that you've recently made or Plex has made to the database when you close the Plex Media Server may or may not have been saved to the database file at this time. So what that means is when we want to work on the database with PlexEditor, if we're working on a copy of the database in a temporary directory, used to we would just copy that database file into the working directory and edit it with PlexEditor for Windows, and when we're done, copy it back into the Plex database directory. You can no longer do that. Well, you can do it, but there's a high likelihood that not all the changes are going to be carried back and forth. It's simple to work around this. Now, when you work on it with PlexEditor for Windows, you can actually edit these files directly in this Plex database directory, but I'm going to suggest that you not do that for the reason that if you're working on the file in a temporary directory and something should happen, or you decide that you made changes that you didn't want to, then all you got to do is exit PlexEditor for Windows and your original database has not been changed. So my suggestion is you work on a temporary copy of the database, make your changes, then copy it back in here. This is also assuming that you're making your own database copies with some type of backup system in place. You never want to work on a database file with external programs without having a backup of it somewhere that you can restore it if the power went out, you got hit by lightning, you did something stupid, or PlexEditor for Windows trashed your file. I have never had that happen, and I'm reasonably sure it's not going to happen, but there's no guarantee. When you're working on a database, things can happen. So what we need to do when we want to work on it is take these three files and copy them to a temporary working directory. Now when PlexEditor for Windows opens this database file, it will also open the cache file of changes that haven't been written to the database file when Plex Media Server was closed. And then when PlexEditor for Windows is done, when you exit PlexEditor for Windows, it will commit the changes and it will delete these two files the way it's supposed to. And you only need to copy this file back into your Plex database directory itself. And you want to delete these two files, then delete or copy your newly edited database file into this directory. Then when Plex Media Server starts up, it will automatically create these files on startup. Now it sounds a little bit complicated, but it's not. Basically, you just got copy a couple of files, delete a couple of files, copy the new file. PlexEditor for Windows has the capability to run a batch file on startup, and it can also run a batch file when you end PlexEditor for Windows. Normally when the PlexEditor for Windows is first installed onto your operating system, it's going to go in your program directory. And it's got these two OnStart and OnClose text files that has sample commands to do most of this stuff that we're talking about. Now when it installs when you first install it, it takes these text files and creates a batch file, and it puts them in your system, users, wherever your username is, app data, local PlexEditor directory, and creates these two files out of those two text files. If you're reinstalling PlexEditor or upgrading it and you haven't deleted this directory, which you don't want to do unless you have to, because it's got a settings XML file that has your license in it, for instance. So when you reinstall a newer version, it doesn't overwrite this file, and that way it keeps your program registered. And it creates this directory that you can use as a working temp directory, and it puts your two batch files in here that you can modify as you need to. And in this batch file, it's first thing it does is it's got 3 commands that kills Plex Media Server. So whenever you run PlexEditor for Windows, it'll ask you if you want to run this batch file. If you tell it yes, it'll shut down the Plex Media Server. Then it's going to change directory to your temp directory, and then it's going to copy your database, the index log file, and the log file itself, or the cache files. It's going to copy them into your working directory, and then it's going to exit this batch program and start up PlexEditor. And then the OnClose bat, very similar. First thing it does, it's got a 3-second timeout break. It may not need any timeout breaks, but I'm just making sure that the changes have been committed to the newly edited database before it starts copying the files. I've got 3 seconds on here because I've been testing it, but it probably only needs 1 second, and it may not even need any at all. So you can adjust that any time you want to. So it does a little timeout to let the cache make sure the cache has been written to the disk. Then it deletes the index and the cache file from the Plex database directory itself, and then it copies the newly edited database from our temp directory into the Plex database directory, and then it's changing the directory to the Plex Media Server directory, and then it's starting the Plex Media Server back up, and then it's actually exiting this batch file. So what that looks like is, if PlexEditor was running right now, which now it is, and we have these 3 files here, and if we go to my data directory, I'll just get rid of that. Now if we're going to run PlexEditor, the first thing it's going to do is ask us if we want to run the OnStart batch file. If we don't, then it'll just start up without running the batch file. So I'll start it up once first, and since I deleted the temporary database directory or file, it doesn't have one, so it's looking for one. I'm just going to go ahead and kill that and show you under the settings here you have OnStart and OnBatFile where you can turn them on or off, and that's how the program knows whether to ask you if it wants to run the OnStart bat or the OnClose bat. So I'll leave them on, and I'll go ahead and get out of here. And now we'll do it again. We'll start it up, and this time we'll tell it to run the OnStart bat. Now it's killed PlexEditor for Windows. It's still showing up here until you run your mouse over it, and then it disappears. If we go look in our directory, it's copied our 3 files into our temp directory now. We can make whatever changes that we want to make to it. I'm going to tell it I'm going to change this to that just to have something to do here. Okay, now we're made whatever changes we're going to make to any of our movies and stuff, and so we're going ahead and kill PlexEditor. We're going to run our OnClose batch file. And it's deleted, or it's saved as changes, and it's automatically deleted its cache files from our temp directory. Now it's taken this new file 914 1121 13900. It's put it over here. This is now the new file, and when PlexEditor started back up, it recreated these 2 files that the batch file deleted automatically. So now if we go into our media manager just to check and look at our movies, and if we look at our genres here, you can see that the action genre that was there that we just deleted, it no longer shows up, and that's the indication that it's accepted the changes that we made. And basically that's all it is to it. You set up your batch files. You can do it manually. You just need to shut down Plex first. Take your 3 database files, copy them into your working directory, start PlexEditor, make any changes that you want to it, take your database file, copy it back into your Plex database directory, then these are recreated on startup, but just to be safe, just go ahead and delete them since we made changes to the database, and then start Plex Media Server back up, and that's all there is to it.